Marcus Reed had long ago stopped chasing recognition. At 42 years old, the black single dad had learned that life rarely rewarded the loudest person in the room. Instead, it quietly rewarded those who showed up every day, kept their promises, and never stopped doing the right thing, even when nobody noticed. Every weekday morning began the same way. At exactly 6:30, Marcus stood in the tiny kitchen of his modest Brooklyn townhouse making blueberry pancakes while 9-year-old Ava sat at the table finishing her homework. "Dad," she asked one morning, "do old papers really matter that much?" Marcus smiled as he flipped another pancake. "Sometimes they're just paper." He placed breakfast onto her plate. "And sometimes, they're the only voice someone leaves behind." Ava thought about that for a second before grinning. "So every letter is like someone's last conversation?" Marcus nodded proudly. "Exactly." Those words had become almost a family tradition. Years earlier, before cancer stole his wife, Emily, she had spent her weekends restoring old diaries, photographs, and handwritten journals for local museums. Emily always believed history deserved to be remembered exactly as it happened. Not rewritten, not forgotten, just preserved. Before she passed away, she had taken Marcus's hand inside their hospital room. "Promise me something." He squeezed her fingers. "Anything. No matter how hard life gets. Help people protect the truth." Marcus never forgot that promise. After Emily's death, he left his corporate consulting career behind. The money had been good. The hours had not. Instead, he accepted a position teaching American history at a public high school. During weekends, he volunteered for museums restoring damaged historical documents. The work paid almost nothing, but every restored letter, every faded diary, every forgotten photograph, felt like keeping another promise to Emily. That Saturday morning, Marcus planned nothing more exciting than taking Ava to the public library after breakfast. Instead, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed, "Metropolitan Historical Museum." Marcus answered. "This is Marcus." A calm elderly voice responded. "Mr. Reed? This is Professor Daniel Whitaker." Marcus immediately recognized the name. Professor Whitaker was one of America's leading historical preservation experts. "I apologize for disturbing your weekend. We have a rather unusual situation." Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter. "I'm listening." Professor Whitaker continued. "Yesterday evening, workers began restoring the original Hale Courthouse before its conversion into the new Hale Legacy Museum. They discovered a hidden military trunk sealed behind an old stone wall." Marcus frowned. "Interesting." "It becomes more interesting. The trunk contains an unopened family letter." Marcus remained silent, judging from the wax seal and the condition of the paper. "It has never been opened." "Not once." Marcus slowly looked toward Ava, who was quietly packing her school books into a small backpack. "Why call me?" Professor Whitaker answered immediately. "Because several preservation specialists refused. The paper is nearly 50 years old. One careless movement, and history disappears forever." Marcus understood. Old paper became fragile like dry leaves. One wrong touch, one sudden movement, and decades of history could crumble into dust. "When do you need me?" Professor Whitaker paused. "This afternoon." Marcus checked the clock. "I'll be there." "There is one more thing." Marcus waited. "The Hale family has decided the letter will be opened publicly tonight during their annual charity gala." Marcus blinked. "A gala?" "Yes. Nearly every major media outlet will attend." Marcus almost laughed. "You know, public events aren't exactly my specialty." Professor Whitaker chuckled softly. "We're not inviting you because you're famous. We're inviting you because you're careful." After ending the call, Marcus looked at Ava. She had clearly been listening. "Big job." Marcus nodded. "Maybe." She smiled. "You'll say yes." He raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" "Because Mom would've." Marcus couldn't help smiling. "You always know exactly what to say." 3 hours later, father and daughter stood outside the massive Metropolitan Historical Museum. Construction crews moved carefully around antique stone columns while historians documented every artifact removed from the old courthouse. Professor Whitaker greeted Marcus warmly. His silver hair peeked from beneath a museum cap. "I'm glad you came." He led Marcus toward a climate-controlled preservation room. Inside, several experts stood around a weathered military trunk. The faded American flag resting inside remained perfectly folded despite decades in storage. Beneath it, wrapped inside protective linen, lay one yellowed envelope. Marcus immediately noticed something unusual. The wax seal. One conservator nodded. "Exactly." Marcus leaned closer. Most family seals used ordinary red wax. This one carried deep blue wax mixed with tiny silver flakes. An extremely rare combination. Even stranger, the seal had never cracked. Not even slightly. Marcus whispered almost to himself. Someone wanted this to survive. Professor Whitaker nodded. And they succeeded. One museum employee carefully handed Marcus a folder. Inside were photographs recovered from the trunk. Military uniforms. Medical tents. Field hospitals. One image immediately caught Marcus's attention. A young black army medic stood beside dozens of rescued civilians. Across the bottom someone had written only one sentence. "The man who saved everyone, but was never remembered." Marcus stared at the photograph longer than expected. Something about the medic's calm eyes felt strangely familiar. Before he could ask another question, museum security entered. "Mr. Reed, the Hale Foundation has arrived." A line of black luxury vehicles slowly entered the museum courtyard. Reporters instantly surrounded the entrance. Camera flashes exploded across the pavement. The rear door of the lead limousine opened. Victoria Hale stepped out. Elegant, confident, completely composed. The billionaire CEO briefly thanked reporters before entering the museum. Marcus expected arrogance. Instead, she walked directly toward Professor Whitaker. "Professor, thank you for protecting my family's history." Her voice carried genuine respect. Then she noticed Marcus. Professor Whitaker smiled. "Victoria, this is Marcus Reed, the preservation specialist I told you about." Victoria extended her hand. "Mr. Reed, I've heard remarkable things about your work." Marcus shook her hand politely. "I simply try not to damage history." A faint smile crossed Victoria's face. "I hope tonight you help us discover it." Hours later, crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom. Hundreds of distinguished guests filled their seats. National television cameras lined the rear wall. At the center of the stage, the antique military trunk rested beneath a single spotlight. Marcus quietly slipped on a pair of white archival gloves. He reached toward the blue wax seal, and the entire ballroom held its breath. Marcus stood beneath the spotlight without saying a single word. The ballroom had become so quiet, even the soft hum of the air conditioning could be heard. 300 guests watched every movement of his hands. Television cameras slowly zoomed closer. Victoria Hale remained only a few feet away, her expression calm but curious. The antique envelope rested on a velvet cushion. Marcus didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he carefully examined every corner of the fragile paper. His white archival gloves barely touched its surface. One of the television hosts whispered into his microphone. "He's inspecting the condition before opening it." Another guest quietly muttered, "Why is it taking so long?" Marcus ignored the voices. Old documents always spoke, long before anyone read the words inside. He noticed tiny fibers around the edges. The paper had aged naturally. No modern glue. No restoration marks. Then his eyes stopped on something almost invisible. Near the bottom corner, someone had pressed a tiny fingerprint into the drying wax decades earlier. It wasn't accidental. It had been left there intentionally. Marcus leaned closer. Professor Whitaker immediately noticed his reaction. "What is it?" Marcus answered softly. "Whoever sealed this letter wanted future generations to know exactly who closed it." Whitaker looked surprised. "You can tell that?" Marcus nodded. People hide signatures. They rarely hide fingerprints. Several museum historians quietly exchanged amazed looks. Marcus gently lifted the envelope. It felt heavier than expected. Much heavier. He looked toward Professor Whitaker. Did anyone weigh this? No. Marcus frowned. A single letter shouldn't weigh this much. Victoria stepped closer. Could there be photographs inside? Marcus slowly shook his head. I don't think so. The room became silent again. Without opening it, he carefully tilted the envelope beneath the spotlight. Something inside shifted. Not like photographs. Not like money. Almost. Like folded parchment. Professor Whitaker whispered, "You think there's more than one document?" Marcus looked thoughtful. "I won't know until it's opened." Victoria took a slow breath. "My family has waited nearly 50 years. I suppose another few minutes won't matter." A few guests laughed softly. The tension eased. Marcus smiled politely. Then he carefully positioned a tiny preservation blade beneath the old blue wax seal. He stopped again. His eyes narrowed. "Professor." Whitaker stepped beside him. "Yes. The seal isn't attached to the paper." Whitaker looked confused. "What do you mean?" Marcus pointed carefully. "The wax only holds the outer flap. The envelope itself was stitched closed first." Several historians gasped. "Stitched?" Marcus nodded. He carefully turned the envelope over. Tiny faded threads ran across the edge. Almost impossible to notice. Professor Whitaker removed his glasses. "Incredible. I completely missed that." Marcus smiled. "Most people would." One elderly historian quietly spoke. "This wasn't meant to be opened quickly." Marcus answered, "No. It was meant to survive." Victoria listened silently. For the first time that evening, she realized this wasn't simply an old family keepsake. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect whatever rested inside. Marcus slowly cut the delicate thread. One stitch, then another. The ballroom remained perfectly silent. No one even reached for their drinks. Every eye remained fixed on the stage. Finally, the last thread loosened. Marcus gently unfolded the flap. Inside rested two perfectly folded sheets. Not one. The audience murmured. Professor Whitaker looked genuinely stunned. "You were right." Marcus carefully removed the first page. Then stopped. Something remained inside. A much smaller folded piece rested beneath it. No larger than a postcard. Marcus didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, he unfolded the larger page first. Beautiful handwritten ink covered every inch. Despite its age, every sentence remained remarkably clear. Marcus read only the opening line silently. His expression changed instantly. His shoulders stiffened. His breathing slowed. Victoria immediately noticed. "What is it?" Marcus didn't answer. He continued reading another line. Then another. Professor Whitaker quietly stepped closer. "Marcus." Marcus finally looked up. His eyes were no longer studying history. They were filled with disbelief. He turned toward Victoria. "I think you should read this." Victoria hesitated. "My family has never opened it." Marcus nodded. "And I don't believe a stranger should be the first voice your family hears." She slowly accepted the fragile page with trembling hands. The ballroom waited. Victoria looked down. She read the first sentence. Then the second. The colors slowly disappeared from her face. She blinked once. Suddenly, her lower lip trembled. She covered her mouth. A tear rolled onto the paper. Another followed. Within seconds, the woman known across Wall Street as the Ice Queen couldn't stop crying. The audience sat frozen. No one understood what she had read. Reporters looked at one another in confusion. Television cameras captured every tear. Professor Whitaker quietly asked, "Victoria, what does it say?" She tried to answer. No words came out. She simply shook her head. Marcus gently reached toward the letter. "May I?" She silently handed it back. Marcus took one careful breath, then began reading aloud. "If this letter has finally been opened, Then someone has spent 50 years believing a terrible lie. The entire ballroom fell into absolute silence. No one realized the very next paragraph would reveal a name that had been deliberately erased from the Hale family's history nearly half a century earlier. Marcus lowered his eyes back to the fragile page. For several long seconds, he didn't read another word. The silence inside the ballroom became almost unbearable. Television cameras remained fixed on Victoria Hale. America had never seen the billionaire CEO like this. Her carefully controlled expression had completely disappeared. Tears continued rolling down her face. She wasn't crying because someone had died. She was crying because whoever had written that letter already knew the truth had been hidden. Marcus finally looked up. "Victoria?" She slowly nodded. "You should hear every word." She wiped her eyes. "I'm ready." Marcus carefully adjusted the old paper beneath the spotlight and continued reading. "If this letter has reached your hands, please do not judge anyone until you know the entire story." Several guests exchanged puzzled looks. The sentence sounded less like a goodbye and more like a warning. Marcus continued. "Many people will tell you I disappeared. Others will say I abandoned my family. Neither is true." A murmur spread across the ballroom. Victoria's breathing became heavier. Marcus paused again. He glanced toward Professor Whitaker. "Has anyone in the Hale family ever mentioned the name written at the bottom of this page?" Professor Whitaker shook his head. "No. Never." Marcus looked thoughtful. The writer assumed his family would eventually forget him. Victoria whispered, "My grandmother never spoke about anyone before my grandfather." Marcus slowly nodded. "Perhaps she wasn't allowed to." The ballroom immediately became silent again. That single sentence felt heavier than the letter itself. One television reporter quietly whispered into her microphone, "If that's true, this isn't simply family history. This could rewrite everything the Hale family believes about its past." Marcus continued reading. "I know powerful people will try to bury this letter. If they succeed, please remember only one thing. Truth survives longer than lies." Victoria lowered her head. She quietly repeated the sentence to herself. Truth survives longer than lies. Almost as though hearing words written decades before, yet somehow meant specifically for her. Across the ballroom, several elderly guests had stopped looking at Marcus. Instead, they stared at each other. One gray-haired man slowly removed his glasses. Another quietly lowered his head. Marcus noticed, not because they looked emotional, because they looked uneasy, very uneasy. He kept reading. "Everything I did for my family. If history tells you otherwise, history has been rewritten." A chill passed through the audience. Victoria suddenly interrupted. "Marcus." He looked toward her. "May I see the signature?" Marcus carefully turned the page. The final portion remained folded beneath his fingers. Only the signature line was visible. Victoria leaned closer. The moment she saw the handwriting, she froze. "I've seen this before." Professor Whitaker looked surprised. "You have?" Victoria nodded slowly. "My grandmother kept one framed Christmas card in her bedroom. It carried exactly the same handwriting. No one ever explained who wrote it." Marcus gently placed the letter back on the velvet table. "So whoever wrote this was part of your family's life?" Victoria whispered, "For at least some time." Professor Whitaker looked genuinely confused. "But every official Hale family record begins with Edward Hale. There isn't another man listed anywhere." Marcus quietly answered, "Official records tell us what survived. They don't always tell us what happened." The room fell silent again. At that exact moment, an elderly gentleman seated in the second row suddenly stood. His expensive tuxedo immediately caught everyone's attention. Marcus noticed Professor Whitaker's expression change. He recognized him. "Mr. Langston," Whitaker said quietly. The old man hesitated. Every camera immediately turned toward him. He looked toward Victoria, then toward the letter. His voice sounded weaker than before. "I think I should leave." Several reporters frowned. Victoria looked confused. Mr. Langston? You've served on our family foundation for 30 years. Why would you leave now? The elderly man avoided eye contact. I don't believe I belong here anymore. Without another word, he slowly began walking toward the ballroom exit. Marcus watched him carefully. Something wasn't right. People walked away from uncomfortable memories. Not from old letters. They already knew what those letters contained. Marcus spoke calmly. Sir. The old man stopped. Without turning around, Marcus continued. Were you expecting this letter to remain sealed forever? The ballroom became absolutely silent. Langston closed his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he answered without facing anyone. I prayed. No one would ever find it. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Victoria's eyes widened. What do you mean? Langston slowly turned around. His face had lost all color. I warned them. I told them the truth would eventually return. Marcus frowned. Them? The old man looked at the stage. Then at the hundreds of guests. Finally, at Victoria. There were 5 of us. The audience erupted into whispers. 5 people had known? Victoria took one step forward. What are you talking about? Langston looked toward the antique military trunk. The letter was never supposed to survive. The ballroom instantly fell silent again. Professor Whitaker looked stunned, but it was hidden behind solid stone. Langston slowly nodded. Exactly. Because someone refused to destroy it. Marcus immediately looked down at the trunk. At the smaller folded document that still remained untouched inside the envelope. He suddenly understood something. The letter hadn't been hidden alone. Not for the company. For the truth. Victoria walked back toward Marcus. She quietly held out a folder. Inside was a check. $5 million. For you. Marcus smiled gently. Then closed the folder. I can't accept it. Victoria looked surprised. You gave my family its history back. Marcus shook his head. No. I only opened the envelope. The truth was already inside. Victoria couldn't stop smiling through her tears. So what do I owe you? Marcus thought for a moment. Then looked toward Ava, who had quietly entered the ballroom with Professor Whitaker earlier that evening. His daughter smiled proudly at him. Marcus smiled back. Promise me one thing. Victoria nodded. Anything. Build a museum wing. For the people history forgot. Victoria didn't hesitate. I promise. 1 year later, the Hale Legacy Museum officially opened. Its newest gallery carried a simple bronze plaque. The Elijah Hale Center for Truth and Remembrance. Below it, another inscription appeared. Dedicated to every forgotten hero whose story waited for someone brave enough to open the letter. Standing quietly among the visitors, Marcus held Ava's hand. She looked up at her father. Dad. He smiled. Yes. She looked toward the old military trunk displayed behind protective glass. So, was Mom right? Marcus looked at the letter resting inside the exhibit. Then softly answered. She always was. Every old letter is someone's unfinished conversation. Ava squeezed his hand. Together, they smiled, then quietly walked away.